Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Gimel. On the first daf, we saw a comment by Ravina to Rav Papa and said, "Oh, you really missed the shiur of Rava last night on Shabbat because you were outside the Tichum." And Rava raised some amazing contradictions, and he was able to resolve them. And the first one, we're going to see other contradictions that he raised today, but the first one that we are still dealing with is that when it comes to korbanot, you have to have, it has to be lishma. It's supposed to be lishma. If it's a korban olah, you should have in mind this is a korban olah. If you say about a korban olah while you're doing shechita, this is for a korban shelamim, then it will not fulfill the obligation of the owner. However, what about setam? You just have no intention at all. You don't say it's for an olah, but you don't say it's for a shelamim. You don't say anything at all. And it's okay for a stam lishma. For Zevaḥim is okay. But when it comes to a get, it's not true. A get has to be written for the sake of a specific woman. If you have in mind for a different woman, for sure it's no good. And if you have in mind setam, also it's no good. You just say, I'm writing this for a woman. Not good enough. You have to write it for a specific woman with that name. So what's the difference between korbanot and gitin? And the answer was that regarding korbanot, since it's already designated to be whatever it is, let's say in olah, so then we presume that it will be in olah. So the stam intention continues what it was meant to be, because that's what it's standing for. That's what it's here for. Whereas a married woman, we don't say that setam, she is standing ready for divorce. She's not designated for such. She was designated to be married, not for divorce. And therefore, you have to have specific intention to say, oh yes, this woman named Leah, that's the one that I want you to write this divorce paper for. You have to tell the scribe, and the scribe has to have that in mind. But if he just writes Leah without any specific woman named Leah in mind, that's not good enough to change the presumption. The korban that was consecrated already has a presumption it's going to be used for an olah, so setam lishma is okay. But a woman does not have a presumption of getting divorced, and therefore stam intention is not sufficient. Afterwards, we brought some proofs that in fact, this is the law that stam zevach is okay. And now we're going to start off with a source for get. Vegabe get, istama pasul minelan. What is the source that if you write a get and you just write the woman's name, but you don't have in mind a specific person, that get is invalid? Ilema mehaditnan. Hayaver bashuk v'shama soferim makrin. Ish peloni geresh pelonit makom peloni. V'amar zeh shemi v'zeh shem ishti pasul geresh bo. So let's say this is the origin. Again, we're not looking for origins from Pisukim for the law. We're just looking for Mishnayot that will establish that in fact this distinction that Rava made is in fact the law. And so we try out a Mishnah Masechet Gitin that says, if someone, let's call him Yaakov, he was walking in the marketplace and he heard that the scribes were, someone was dictating to students of the scribes. There were students there who wanted to learn how to write, how to be a sofer. And so you have someone dictating to them, everybody write, and you have maybe 10 students there, and they're all writing the same thing. And so they're learning how to do it. And so the person giving the instruction says, Ish Piloni, let's say, everybody write, Yaakov is divorcing Leah, and they come from Yerushalayim. And then the guy passing by says, oh, what do you know? That's my name, Yaakov, and my name is Leah also. So then he says, you know what? I've been thinking about divorce for a while. Hey, let me take one of these gets, and I will give it to my wife. Can he use it? The answer is no, he cannot, because it was not given with specific intention for his wife, Leah, but rather they were just writing to study how to, practicing how to write gitin. So you see here that setam, intention, just writing Leah, even though they don't have this specific one in mind, is not good. So is this a good proof? We answer no. Dilma kedra papa, damar papa hacha besofrin asuin litlamed askinan vela ichtub l'shum kinitut kelal. we're going to answer as Rav Papa says, because Rav Papa said that here we're talking about students of scribes that are just learning, and they're actually not writing this to be a divorce paper at all. They're just practicing writing, and it happens to be they're writing a language of divorce, but they don't have intention that this document would be actually used for divorce. So you have to have at least intention that it will be a divorce paper, and maybe that's why it's no good, because they didn't have intention that should even be a divorce paper at all. So maybe that's the main problem, and not that they didn't have in mind this woman in particular. Maybe if they, as long as they had in mind that they're actually writing it for a get, maybe it would be okay. So this is not a proof. Ela meha. So from the continuation, the Baraita says, Yater alken. כתב לגרש את אשתו, ונמלך מסעו בן עירו ואמר לו, שמי כשמך ושם אשתי כשם אשתך, פסול לגרש בו. So the second source says, if a man named Yaakov, he decided he's thinking of divorcing his wife, so he had the scribe write a thing for Yaakov, and his wife is named Leah. And then he wrote up the document, and he took it, but he changed his mind. He forgave his wife. He said, no, you know what? I don't want to divorce it. So he throws it on the floor. Some other guy comes along and happens to find it. And he opens it up and he says, oh, Yaakov, that's my name too. And says, Leah, that's my wife's name. And he says, what do you know? So he says, you know what? Since I have the document anyway, I may as well go and divorce my wife. Shouldn't let a good get go to waste. Can he do that? The answer is no. So isn't the reason because this was written for a different Le'ah and not written for his Le'ah. So it's no good. So this will prove that stam intention is no good. Isn't this a good proof? We say, no, that's not a good proof. Over here, this get was specifically designated for a different Le'ah and not for the Le'ah of the guy who found it. So this is not a case of stam. This is actually a case of having in mind someone different altogether. Okay, not a proof. אלא מה, יתר על כן, יש לו שתי נשים ששמותיהן שוות, כתב לגרש את הגדולה, לא יגרש בו את הקטנה. Here, this case is a man has two wives, and the two wives have the same name. Yaakov, he's married to Leah A and Leah B. They're just both named Leah. And he writes, he goes to the scribe, and he says, I want to divorce my older wife, Leah. And so the scribe writes, Yaakov is going to divorce Leah. And then he gets home, he says, you know what? I changed my mind. I actually want to stay married to the older Leah. I want to divorce the younger Leah. Can he do that? The answer is no, he cannot give it to the younger Leah. Doesn't that mean that you have to have specific intention for a certain Le'ah, and if it's Sitam, then it's no good? And the answer is no. Here also, it's the same problem as the previous proof. Here it's no good because this get was specifically designated for the older Le'ah, and that by doing that, it's not for the younger Le'ah. This is not a case of Sitam, where he wrote it just for a woman named Le'ah. It was for a specific woman named Le'ah, so now we cannot use it. There's no proof from here regarding a case of Sitam. Ela meha, yater al ken, amar lab ketob ule'eze sherse garesh, pasul legaresh bo. If the same case, a man Yaakov is married to two wives with the same name, Leah and Leah, and he goes to the scribe and he said, listen, I want to divorce one of my wives. I don't know which one yet. So can you write it? Just write Leah, and then whichever one I decide, when I get home later, whichever one I decide to divorce, then that should be the one that it applies to. Can he do that? He cannot do that. So this seems to be a much better proof than the previous ones, because here it was not designated for this Le'ah or for that Le'ah. He wrote Le'ah, Sitam. And yet it's no good. So that's a good proof that a Sitam get is no good. And we answer no. No, maybe the reason why this is no good is because in order for it to work, you would have to have the principle of Berera, which is retroactive designation. Basically, this husband is telling the scribe, write Le'ah, and then when I get home and I decide that I'm going to give it to the older one, retroactively I want you to have in mind the older one. Or if I decide later to have the younger one, to do the younger one, I want you to have the younger one in mind now. I want you to have in mind now that whatever I fill in the blank with later on, that's what you'll have now. So you have to assume that you can use retroactive designation, and here it doesn't work because you cannot use retroactive designation, and that's why it's no good here. But maybe this is not about sitam. So this is not a proof either. Ela mehaha kotib tofse gitin sarich sheyanech mekom ha'ish mekom ha'isha mekom ha'edim mekom hazeman. Rather, it's going to be from this Mishnah a little bit later on in Masechet Gitin that says, when someone is writing the standard part of the get, a standard part is the part that's you're always going to have the critical information in a get. You have to the scribe. Let's say he wants to write some parts of it beforehand, so he has a form letter ready, and then you could just fill in the blanks to save time. If he's busy one day when a lot of people come in for a get. So he can do that. He can fill in the standard formulation, but he has to leave blank the place of the name of the husband and the place of the name of the wife and the place for the witnesses and also the time. He can't fill in the time from beforehand. All these are dependent on a particular case. Shmuel adds, he also has to leave blank the place where you write the key formula for the get that says, behold, you are permitted to marry anybody. That's the key formula that effectuates the divorce. What do you learn from here? That you can't just write that in from before, sitam, and say, this will apply to whoever I write in with the names. You can't do that because that would be stam. And when the scribe writes this key phrase, haret motet l'chol adam, he has to have l'shem isha. He has to have in mind that he's writing this so that this man can divorce this particular woman. And so you see here, this is a case of sitam, and yet Shmuel says you can't write it before because then it would be sitam and then it would be no good. You have to fill it in only when you know which man is divorcing which woman. And so this is a good final proof that sitam, intention with a get, is pasul. To Rame Mileta Achariti. Then Ravina told Rav Papa about a second contradiction that Rava had brought up and answered in his Friday night lecture. And he said, Mi amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav, chatat shechata l'shem ola pesula, shechata l'shem cholin keshera. How could Rav say that if you have something designated as a korban hatat, and someone did shechita on that animal, thinking that it's an olah, it's pasul. That's for sure. It's a chatat, so it's going to be no good at all. But if the one who did shechita had in mind that's going to be cholin, it's just going to be a non-sacred animal, not a sacrifice at all, then it's okay. What do we learn from this? What's the principle behind it? Alma demina machariba delab mina la machariba. We see that if something is within the same category, if it's another type of sacrifice, although not exactly the same sacrifice, but it's within the category of sacrifice, but the wrong one, then it's going to ruin the korban. But if the thing that you're having in mind is not even in the mean, it's not even within the same category as the sacrifice, then it does not ruin it. Right, and that's why here, if it's a hatat, you had in mind an olah that's similar enough that is going to ruin it because it's similar in that it is a sacrifice. It means you really had in mind it's going to be a sacrifice, but the wrong one. Then the sacrifice is invalid. But you had in mind, let's say you had in mind, I'm doing the shechita on having in mind it's going to be an apple pie. Apple pie has nothing to do with korban. So that intention is not going to ruin it because it's so far out, it's so totally different that we just ignore it altogether. And the same thing here. Okay, it's an animal. You had in mind it's going to be just a regular cholin animal, non-sacred. It's not even within the category of a sacrifice, and therefore it does not block the korban. We ignore it. Okay, that's Rav's principle. Here's the problem. It seems to contradict a Mishnah Masechet Gitin. Urminhu, kol haget shenichtav shelo l'shem isha pasul, va'afilu l'shem goya name pasul. If someone wrote a get, and it was not for the sake of the woman that is actually being divorced, it's no good. We just learned that we know. And even if he had in mind for a non-Jew, also is not valid. Now, why is it not valid here? I understand if he had in mind the wrong Jewish woman, that's within the same category. He wrote it for a certain le'ah, but now you want to use it for a different le'ah. Okay, that's the wrong person. It's within the same category of a Jewish woman who can be divorced. So that's like substituting a chatat for an olah. That's not good. We understand. But if he has in mind as a woman named Leah who's not Jewish, a woman who's not Jewish, the laws of Kiddushin and Gitin do not even apply to that person at all. And therefore, if it's totally outside the category, then it should be okay. But just like here, so we have a contradiction where regarding a korban, we say something in a different category is okay, and here in Getin, something in a different category is not okay. And we have an answer. V'shaneh get dalgo yamine havale setama usetama pasul. Regarding the get, if you would just take out the line of the goya, just remove that intention. So okay, fine. She's a different category, so ignore it altogether. Imagine that he didn't say it's for this goya. So then what is it going to be? It's going to be setam, because he didn't have in mind this specific Jewish woman named Leah, and so a stam get we already know is pasul. That's why it's pasul, not because he had in mind a non-Jew, but because he didn't have in mind the correct le'ah that he's using it for. Whereas kodashim dal holin minayu havale setama ustama kesherim. When it comes to sacrifices, if you ignore the fact that he said it's going to be for chulin, because chulin's a different category, we can ignore that intention altogether. Okay, so now what's left? Setam. He didn't have in mind chatat. He didn't have in mind olah. He had in mind nothing, but it was already designated as a chatat, and we know the principle that regarding sacrifices, setam intention is okay. So that's why in this case, the sacrifice is fine. So we can understand this contradiction we're actually solving based on what we already saw in the previous one. And now we have yet a third. Urma mileta hariti. Ravaye raised yet another contradiction. Mi amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav. Chatat shechata l'shem olah pesula. Shechata l'shem cholin keshera. Alma demina machariba de la mina la machariba. The first part of the contradiction is the same as with the one we just saw. How could Rav say that if you have something designated as a korban hatat, and someone did shechita, having in mind that it's an olah, it's no good. But if you had in mind it's going to be chulin, it is good. We see from that principle of Rav that if it's in the same category, then it will ruin it. It will be taken into account. If it's something that's in a different category, then we ignore it, and it's okay. That's one principle. Here's the contradiction, not from Gitin this time, but from the laws of Tum'ah. V'hatanya, tocho velo toch tocho, v'afilu kilishetef masil. The pasuk says that regarding earthenware vessels, it becomes tameh from its interior. If you have a dead creepy crawly, a dead mouse, that falls on the outside of an earthenware vessel, does not become tameh. There's special law about earthenware vessels that only if it goes into the airspace inside the earthenware vessel, then the vessel becomes tameh. That's a special law for earthenware. It's not true of other vessels that are called keli shetef, vessels that you can rinse, meaning that you can kosher in a mikveh. An earthenware vessel, if it becomes tameh, there's no way to kosher it. There's no way to make it tahor. You have to just break it. You cannot put it in a mikveh. But keli shetef, like if it's made out of metal or wood, if it becomes tameh, you can put it in the mikveh, and now it's tahor. Regarding those vessels, they can become tameh, both if something tameh touches its outside or its inside. So that's the difference between earthenware and other vessels. That's the basic law. Now, the word tocho within this is teaching us yet something else. The Baraita says tocho makes it tameh, but not toch tocho. Imagine like a Russian doll. You have two earthenware vessels, a big one and a small one, and the small one is inside the big one. And there's food inside the small one. Now, there's a mouse that goes in between the big one. It's in the big one, but outside the small one. So, where that mouse would make the large vessel impure, and any food that's in the large vessel also impure. But what about the food that's inside the smaller vessel? Well, that smaller vessel itself has an outside and an inside, and this dead mouse is on the outside of the vessel, and therefore that protects the food that's inside. That would be a simple case. Now here's the more complicated case. Again, you have two vessels. The outside one is earthenware. The inside one is made out of metal. And metal generally can receive tumah from inside or from outside. So now you have inside this big earthenware vessel, you have a food that's between the big one and the small metal vessel that's inside. You would think that since the metal vessel can contract impurity both from inside and outside, the dead mouse that's outside will make it tameh and make the food inside it also tameh. That's what you would think. That's why this pasuk tocha comes to say, no, since it's inside an earthenware vessel, the laws of earthenware vessels apply even to the metal vessel that's inside. And therefore, just like with the big earthenware vessel, it only can contract impurity from the outside and not from the inside. So too, within the earthenware vessel, the small vessel that's inside will have the same law, that only if it's outside of that vessel, it will make it tameh, but if it's inside the inside vessel, then that food is protected. How is this relevant? Well, we see here that even though we're talking about two different categories, one is an earthenware vessel, and the other category is a metal vessel. These are two different categories, and yet we consider the different category to be the same. We give the metal vessel the same status as the earthenware vessel that's outside it. Even though it's a different category, still we take it into account and it can protect the food inside. This is in contradiction to the principle that we saw here, that if something is of a different category, then we ignore it altogether. We make believe it's not there. You said, oh, this is going to be cholin. Cholin, that's not even a sacrifice. So forget that you even said that, and therefore the sacrifice is going to be just fine. So if something's of a different category, you ignore it and treat it as if it's not there. But here, even though it's a different category, you don't ignore it. If you ignored the small vessel, then the inside would be tameh. No, instead, we treat it all as if it's the same category, even though it's different categories. We treat the inside vessel as if it's an earthenware vessel because it's inside it. So you see that this is working off an opposite principle. How can we resolve this contradiction? Now, the answer is going to be that, in fact, these vessels are within the same category. They're both called vessels. So what? One is an earthenware vessel and one is a metal vessel. They're within the same category as vessels. Just like with sacrifices, one is a chatat, one is an olah. That's going to be considered within the same category, and that's why we will take it into account. And since it's the same category, it's close enough. So the metal vessel is close enough to the earthenware vessel that it will take on the law of the earthenware vessel when it's inside the earthenware vessel. Just like here, it's in the same category. So thinking it's an olah is too close to a chatat, that's going to be considered within the category of sacrifices and therefore make it no good. That's going to be the answer. And we're going to compare something that's a different category of cholin to another analogy when it comes to tum'ah. Veshaneh. Rava resolved the issue as follows. Asu cholin esel kodashim kemechisa esel tanur. We can make the following analogy that cholin, where compared to kodashim, which is a different category, non-sacrifice versus sacrifice, that is not like two vessels, one made out of different things, but rather that is like a partition in an oven. If you have a partition in an oven, here's a picture of an ancient oven that would be big enough that you can go inside or reach inside and put a partition. Let's say you're only cooking a little bit and you don't want to heat up the whole oven, so you could put a partition and heat up one side. Or if different people are sharing the oven, you could put a partition to say, this is the stuff on my side and that stuff on the other side is yours. And this partition will be a separation when it comes to an ohel. If there's a dead body in the oven, it doesn't matter if it's on or not on. It could be cold. The point is it's an earthenware oven, and the partition is not a vessel. The partition is just some kind of flimsy wall that one puts in temporarily. So here's the law. Ma mechitza esel tanur la mahanya la kelal, af holin esel kodashim la mahanya le kelal. If one puts a mechitza into an oven, it will not be effective in preventing the transmission of tum'ah. So that if there's a dead mouse, this is an earthenware vessel, so anything inside, even in the airspace hanging, is going to give impurity throughout the whole thing. When you have an oven and there is a partition in it, the partition is as if it's not there because it's of a different category. It's not a vessel. So too, cholin esel kodashim la mahanya le kelal. So too, cholin, when is a different category altogether for sacrifices, and therefore we ignore it altogether. When someone has a kodesh and has in mind, I'm going to do it for cholin, we ignore that statement of that intention for cholin, and that's what it's like. That's what it'll be. That's where it'll be the same as two different categories. Ditnan, and there's Mishnah Masechet Kelim that teaches us about the laws of ovens. Tanur shehasaso b'nesarim or bidiot v'nimsa sheres b'makom echad hakol tameh. If you have an oven and you divided it with boards or curtains, and you find a dead mouse in one side of it, the whole thing is tameh. Why doesn't the curtain separate between the two? Because the curtain is a separate thing. The big oven is a vessel. The curtain is not a vessel. It's a different category. And so we ignore things that are different categories. And this is a good answer. Just like here, Tuman Tahara, if it's a different category, we ignore it. If it's the same category, we leave it in. We include it. And consider it to be the same. So too regarding korbanot, if it's a different category cholin, we ignore that statement. If it's within the same category, then we include that statement. And in the case of korbanot, it would be supposed to be l'shem hatat. You said l'shem olah. Well, then it will make it no good. Now the Mishnah continues, and we're going to analyze the continuation also. Kaveret shepetucha ופקוקה בקש ומשולשלת לאוויר התנור, שרס בתוכה התנור טמא, שרס בתנור אוכלין שבתוכה טמאין, ורבי אליעזר מטהר. If you have a kaveret, literally is a beehive, but here it could be not necessarily a natural beehive, but a basket made out of wicker, like this. And it got some holes in it, and you patched up the holes with straw, so that it's not quite a vessel, because it's not complete. It's a vessel, but it has holes in it, and the straw that you put into it is not going to recreate it as a proper vessel. So, if you have such a basket, and it is broken open, and you plugged it up with straw, and it's hanging into the airspace of an oven, and there is a creepy crawly inside the basket, then the whole oven is tameh. Or if there's a creepy crawly, a dead mouse in the oven, then whatever is inside the basket also is tameh. The point is that this basket, if it was a complete basket, it would be a different story. It would be a vessel on its own, and then we would apply the law that we saw before, that a vessel inside an earthenware vessel will protect what's inside. But here, because it has holes in it, and it doesn't matter that the holes are plugged up with some straw, it's still considered as if it has holes. It's not a vessel. Here it's just the same as a partition. And just as a partition is not of the same category as the earthenware vessel, and therefore it does not count as a separation. And a dead mouse anywhere within the airspace, inside the vessel, inside this basket or not, will make everything tameh. So this is all consistent with the opinion of Rabbanan, and this will answer the question according to Rabbanan. But now we're going to introduce another opinion, and then we're going to have to bring up the question again according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer metaher. Rabbi Eliezer says it's tahor. Either way, that as long as, let's say, say the creepy crawly is in the oven, the food in the basket is tahor. Or if the dead mouse is found in the basket, then that's protected, and the food that's in the oven is tahor. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, kal v'chomer, im yasil bameh tehamor lo tasil bekli hacheres hakal. Rabbi Eliezer says, I can derive this based on a kal v'chomer. If a barrel or any partition like this, a basket, partition, whatever, will separate regarding tum'ah of a met. If there's a dead body inside something like an oven, and it's under the same tent. So anything under the same tent will become impure from the dead body. Now, if there's a curtain, a separation, let's say you have a dead body in a room, but there's a curtain, then that will separate, and the tum'ah will stay within one side of the curtain and not go to the other side. And same thing here with the oven and the basket inside. It will separate. If a basket like this is considered a separation for tumat met, which is much more stringent, then all the more so it should be considered a separation for tum'ah of a creepy crawly inside an earthenware vessel, which also involves airspace, but that type of tum'ah is much less, and so therefore this should be considered a separation. Amru lo. Now the Mishnah continues and says, lo im hisil bemet hamor sheken haluka beohalin tasir bekli cheres hakal she'en halukin beohalin. Rabbanan say, no, it's not the same. Just because a vessel like this or any partition will be a separation regarding tumat hamet, although it is hamor, but it's because of it's a law of a tent, and the tent is normally separated by using curtains or boards. That is considered a separate room within a tent, and so when it comes to tent impurity, we use definitions of tent in case a partition is sufficient, and so that's not the same as tasir b'kli cheres hakal shen halukin be'ohalin. That cannot be the same as a partition inside an earthenware vessel, although the laws of a dead mouse in an earthenware vessel is less stringent. That's true, but it's a different definition. For here, all of the airspace, it's not about a tent, which is defined with a curtain, but rather airspace, and airspace can only be separated by another vessel that's inside, within the categories of vessel, and it cannot be separated by a partition. So, according to Rabbanan, these are clearly a divider, a partition in an oven is two separate categories, and just like that is two separate categories, and we don't consider the curtain to be relevant when it comes to tumah inside the earthenware vessel of a creepy crawly that's in it. So too, we have two separate categories regarding the sacrifices versus chulin. So for the rabbis, we have a good solution, a good analogy for cases that are within the same category and different categories. Ha-tenach l'Rabbanan. L'Rabbi Eliezer, ma'ika l'me'amad. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, what are we going to say? When it comes to Tumah and Tahara, he thinks that not only a vessel within a vessel, we consider the same category, and the thing inside the vessel is going to be Tahor. He thinks that even if it's a partition, which is a different category, still it separates the Tumah from the food, and the food will not become Tameh. So he considers even things that are not within the same category to be as if it is within the same category. And so therefore, according to him, we would have to have a contradiction, because according to that, if you had in mind that this should be holin, it should be considered still sufficiently within the same category that it would make the korban pasul. So we need a way to resolve the contradiction according to Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer, kal v'chomer ka'amar. Rabbi Eliezer, he only decided his law about a partition in the oven because of a kal v'chomer. Because he said that, well, if a partition is effective for tumat met, then also it will be effective for the tumah of a dead mouse in the oven. So it's only because of the kal v'chomer that he said this thing, which is a different category, is considered as if it's the same category. But without the kal v'chomer, he would not say so. So let's remove the kal v'chomer, and then he would say, oh, it's a different category, it doesn't count. And that's why it would find a good analogy to korbanot, where korban and cholin are different categories, and therefore we would not count it. So actually it's the same as just ignore the kal vachomer. But we reject this answer. Once Rabbi Eliezer is using kal vachomer in the case of Tumah and Tahara, then he should apply a kal vachomer also in the case of kodashim and say, if this was actually a chatat, I had in mind an olah. It's very similar, and yet it makes it no good. Kodashim will cause other kodashim. If I have in mind one type of sacrifice within the category and of a different sacrifice, it's no good. Then all the more so if it's a different category. Isn't that worse that you're thinking of something that's more different? So if it's a korban hatat and I have in mind an olah, and that makes it unfit, then all the more so if I have in mind that's going to be a cholin animal, that's even worse. So if once Rabbi Eliezer is going to use a kal vachomer in this case, you should use a kal vachomer in that case also, and then we will again have a contradiction. Rather, the explanation of Rav is according to Rabbi Elazar the Amora, not to be confused with Rabbi Eliezer the Tana that we just quoted. Damar Rabbi Elazar, my Tama de Rav, Rabbi Elazar explained. What is the reasoning of Rav that if he has in mind for cholin, then it's okay? Ve'lo yechalelu et kodshe bnei Yisrael et asher yanimu ladonai kodashim mechalin kodashim ve'en cholin mechalelim kodashim. Because the pasuk says that the Kohanim shall not desecrate the sacred item of the Bnei Israel, which they set apart to Hashem, and this teaches that only if you have in mind a wrong type of sacrifice, it will make improper a sacrifice that is supposed to be. But cholin does not, because it's a different category altogether. So you see that we have a pasuk to back it up, and that is the explanation of Rav. Once we have a pasuk, now we can go back to the Rabbi Eliezer. Alma atakera apeke mi kal vachomer, and therefore we see that although the logic of this kal vachomer does make sense, that if I had in mind korban olah instead of hatat, it makes it unfit. All the more so, cholin would make it unfit. That kal vachomer does make sense, but we have a derivation from a pasuk, and this pasuk overrides the kal vachomer, and then now this will solve the contradiction also for Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer would say, in the case of Tumah and Tahara, I have a kal vachomer that tells me that I should include even partitions, although they're a different category, still I'm going to include them and make them the same because of a kal vachomer of comparing Tumat Mit to Tumah of a creepy crawly. There I have a kal vachomer. Here also I have a kal vachomer, but here I have a pasuk that overrides the kal vachomer, and that's why, because of this overriding, that's why it has to be within the same category when it comes to kodashim. However, we reject this. Hold on. Here also, in the case of Tumah and Tahara, let the word tocho, that we made a derivation from before, that tocho, but not toch tocho, that if there's a vessel in the vessel, then we consider it something different. So why don't we say the same thing here, that this tocho will undo that kal vachomer. And if you undo that kal vachomer, it'll be the same as overriding this kal vachomer, and then you'll have the contradiction once again. And the answer is, Hai tocho mi ba'ele le'ochlin, shegibelan beti the answer is, for Rabbi Eliezer, he will say that we need this word tocho to teach us the law about what happens if you take some food and you knead clay around it, and then you put the whole thing in the oven. You might do that because you want the food to become warmer slowly, so you put like an insulation around it, or it will protect it, it'll get hard, and then it'll be a protection, and then when you want to eat it, you can break it open. So let's say you have such a thing, and in that oven there's also a dead mouse. So this tocho is going to come teach us a law about what happens with the food inside. I might think that since if a dead mouse touched it, it, let's say not in the oven, it would not transfer tumah to the food because the clay is protecting it, is in interposition. So too, I might think that it will also protect it within the oven as like a vessel, and this is tumah from outside, will not affect the food inside. And therefore, Tocha comes to teach me that no, in this case, we're not going to consider this clay around it as its own vessel, and the tum'ah from the airspace will enter it. So here, this tocho we use, Rabbi Eliezer uses for a different law altogether, and therefore he cannot use it to override the kal vachomer. Now, how about Rabbanan? V'Rabbanan hanach lasirichi kera. Rabbanan think that this case doesn't need a pasuk. We can just obvious that we can figure it out, and therefore, according to Rabbanan, we will use the phrase tocho to distinguish between something that's the same category, if it's a vessel within a vessel, even if it's a different type of vessel, that's okay. It's the same category of vessels, and that will be a separation and protect what's inside the inner vessel from outside. But that tocho, that derasha, will override any possible kal vachomer that you're going to bring from a partition, a separation. And therefore, according to Rabbanan, we can clearly make a distinction between a partition, which is a different category, and therefore will not be effective in being a partition for tumah of sheretz inside an oven, because it's a different category altogether, and so that would be the same as the law of kodashim, where something that's a different category of chulin will not have an effect on something that is kodashim, because those are two different categories. And so now we resolved this contradiction both according to Rabbanan and according to Rabbi Eliezer. Now that we finished with Rava's 3 contradictions, we're going to quote yet another contradiction that was brought up by Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef bar Ameh, Rameh Shinui Kodesh Ashinui Be'alim Umeshaneh. He raised a contradiction between 2 statements of Rav. One has to do with someone who has the wrong intention regarding the type of korban, versus someone who has a wrong intention regarding the owner who brings the korban. And he will also resolve this contradiction. Mi amar Rav, Hatat sheshechata l'shem hatat keshera, l'shem ola pesula. Alma delav mina machariba, demina la mahariv ba. Rav, on the one hand, said that if someone, let's say they ate chayleb by mistake and also ate dam by mistake, the same person, so he really has to bring 2 korban hatats. Now, he brought his first korban hatat, and he had in mind that this should be for his chayleb. And then the kohen takes it and he does shechita, having in mind that this is a korban hatat for a different sin, for eating blood. It's kosher, it's okay. You can switch one sin for another. But if the one doing shechita has in mind it's going to be an olah, then it's no good. It's invalid. So we see that if it's of a different category, chatat versus olah, then it's no good. But if it's the same category, one chatat to another chatat, then it's okay. That's on the one hand. Ve'amarav, hatat sheshechata al mi shemechoyab chatat pesula, al mi shemechoyab olah keshera, alma de barmina mahariba, de la barmina la mahariba. This seems to be the opposite what I've said. If someone brought a korban hatat for this person, a person A brought a korban hatat because he ate cheleb, and then the kohen who is slaughtering it has in mind someone else who also has to happen to be that he ate cheleb and also has to bring a korban, and he has in mind the wrong Baal. Although both Baalim are required to bring a korban hatat, it's no good. You have to have in mind the right person. But if the person brought a korban hatat for himself, and the kohen slaughtered it, having in mind someone who is obligated to bring a korban olah, in that case, the animal is kosher. So this is the opposite. If it's the same category, then it's invalid. And if it's a different category, if it goes from hatat to olah, then it is valid. So how can we explain this? Good question. Umeshane hatam b'shachat otah lechatat amar chamana v'lechatat Hashem hatat nishchata. If it's talking about the same person and he has to bring 2 korban hatats, well, the pasuk says that he has to slaughter it as a hatat. As long as it is a hatat, then it's okay. Hatat l'shem hatat. It's for the same person, and it's also a korban hatat. So switching from one sin to another, that's permitted. If it's an olah, then it's going to be totally different. That's why it's no good. However, in the second category, where it's a different person, pasuk says he will atone for him, meaning that this korban hatat can only atone for the specific person who brought it, and not for anybody else. Chavero dumiyadide has to be someone else that is similar to him, shemechoyav kapara kemota, who has to bring another korban like it. That person is excluded. So ketib alav velo al chavero, chiped alav is going to exclude and make disqualified if he has in mind for a different person, and that other person is similar to him in that he has to bring also a korban chatat, just like the first person, then that korban is disqualified because it's too similar. But if the other guy is not the same, the other guy has to bring korban olah. Well, then he's not similar to his friend, and therefore not being similar to his friend is different enough that the korban will remain a valid korban. Rav Chaviva Rame Shinui Ba'alim Toch Tocho Umeshane. And one more contradiction that's brought up by Rav Chaviva, again with a statement of Rav, and this is going to be from the topic of, on the one hand, having in mind the wrong owner of a korban versus the law of toch tocho. So here we go. Umi amar Rav chatat sheshechata al mi shemechoyav chatat besula al mi shemechoyav olah keshera alma demina machariv ba lav mina lav machariv ba. On the one hand, Rav says, as we just saw above, that if you have a korban chatat that's brought by one person who has to bring korban chatat because, let's say, he ate chayleb, and the person slaughtering it has in mind a different person who happens to also be required to bring a korban chatat, then because he had in mind the wrong owner, the animal is not kosher, no good. However, if that other person had to bring a korban olah, then the animal remains a fit korban. We can learn from here that if it's the same category, then it's no good. But if it's a different category, we can ignore it and the animal remains good. Vehatanya toch velo toch tocho afilu kili shetef masil. But this contradicts the law that we learn from the word tocho, that the inside of an earthenware vessel, anything in that airspace, will spread tum'ah from a creepy crawly to any food that's in there, but that's only the airspace. But if there's airspace within an airspace, a vessel within a vessel, even if the inner vessel is of a different kind, and nevertheless it's considered as if it's the same kind, and it will save the food that's in the inside vessel from becoming tameh from a dead mouse that's between the vessels. And so from here we see the opposite conclusion, that if something is of a different kind, we consider it to be the same thing. And over here, if it's of a different kind, then it's considered completely different and will not interfere with the mix-up of the ba'alim because it's so different. So here, being something completely different is considered, being a different category is considered separate. But here, even though it's a different category, it's still considered the same law. Umeshane arba'a tocho ketibe toch tocho toch tocho. And the answer is, actually, there are 4 things that we can learn. It says the word tocho twice in the pasuk, and each one of them, it could have said just toch. So we learn from something from the word toch and from the extra vav, and it has that twice. So there's 4 things that we can learn. And one of them is going to be this law here, and since it comes from a special derivation, that's why this law is special and is different, and therefore is not going to be comparable with the law of korbanot. Now, what are these 4 things that we can learn? Chad legufeh, one for the basic law itself, that for an earthenware vessel, impurity will be from the inside if there's an impure item inside, and food inside, then the food will become tameh. V'chad ligzera shava. Another is going to be used for a gezerah shava to teach that not only is the food inside tameh, but the earthenware vessel itself becomes tameh if there's a dead mouse inside the airspace of the vessel, even if it's not touching it. Chad tocho shel ze velo tocho shel acher. A third instance of this word is to teach me that this law applies only to the inside of an earthenware vessel, but not vessels of other types. If they're made out of different materials, then we do not say this law that something inside the airspace will spread tum'ah. Idach tocho velo toch tocho afilu keli shetef masil. And the last one is to teach us this law that we're talking about, that if you have a vessel inside a vessel, then the food that's in the inner vessel will be protected from a source of tum'ah that's between the vessels, and that's true even if the inner vessel is made out of something that can be koshered in a mikveh. Since we learned this law from a special pasuk, so that's why this law is different in that although it's of a different category, we treat it as the same category. But this pasuk is coming to tell us this is an exception to the normal rule, and the normal rule is, in fact, that if it's a different category, then it is excluded altogether. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.